Physically and digitally remote. The experience of remote Indigenous Australians across the digital divide by Staff Cadet Joshua Utoyo. Part 1. Introduction. The introduction of the Internet and digital technologies is a revolutionary change of historic proportions, all occurring during the lifespans of most Australians. However, the benefits of this revolution have not impacted all groups within Australia equally. The focus of this essay will be concerning Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, particularly those living in regional areas. Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islanders are the most disadvantaged group of people when it comes to accessing digital technologies. Greater access and abilities in the use of digital technologies are fundamental to raising socio-economic outcomes in those communities. Part 2. The situation. The sobering reality of Australian society is that Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islanders are Australia's most socio-economically disadvantaged group. According to the ABS, quote, people who identified as Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander origin were significantly more likely to live in disadvantaged areas, end quote. A lack of physical infrastructure is another barrier to access. According to a study by RMIT, quote, about 43% of the 1,545 First Nations communities and homelands across Australia have no mobile service. End quote. Additionally, data from the ADII, the Australian Digital Inclusion Index, has found that 45.9% of survey respondents from remote Indigenous communities were rated as highly excluded by the ADII, compared with 9.2% of other Australians. End quote. The large disparity in access to digital resources that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities face is a large part of the disadvantage they experience. This makes the challenge of finding the most effective means to improve digital inclusion among Indigenous people to be a very difficult one. If it were so simple, some measures would already have been enacted, as the will to do so does exist. Remote communities, being far away from large population centres, possessing tiny populations, and being socio-economically disadvantaged to begin with, are some of the factors which impede the development of infrastructure. Regardless of these challenges, it is nevertheless still a worthwhile endeavour. Part 3. Rendering assistance. This is why, to close the digital gap, greater resources should be directed to assisting remote Indigenous communities. An example of when this was successfully executed was in the tiny hamlet of Lingara, located about 440 kilometres south of Darwin. The Aboriginal Benefits Account provided a $277,000 grant to the community, which, among other improvements, introduced a satellite internet terminal, giving residents the ability to access the internet and mobile phone reception for the first time. Local regional mayor Brian Pedwell commented on the matter, explaining that, quote, when you can't make or receive a phone call or get on the internet, it means you're cut off from family and essential food and health services. As a result of the new infrastructure, for the people of Lingara, this is going to be life-changing. End quote. It must be noted, however, this grant of infrastructure came at relatively large monetary expense, considering that there are only about a dozen properties within Lingara, as can be observed on Google Earth. Although these people live in isolation and in very small communities, they are in no less need of communication with the outside world, and new technologies such as satellite internet can make the process of providing digital access to remote communities a bit more feasible. Part 4. Educational shortfalls and digital skills. Access to the internet, through commitment and expense, can be improved with time. However, there also exists the issue of digital ability. It is not enough to have access to digital connection, but to use it effectively and to its greatest benefit, people must be properly trained to do so. According to the Mapping the Digital Gap report, Indigenous Australians, especially those living in remote communities, also fall behind in their digital ability scores. The national score, without First Nations people, sits at 65 points, and the First Nations average is a bit lower at 60.7. However, the survey of First Nation people from remote communities comes in at 45.7 points, highlighting a significant disparity in educational outcomes. This disparity between remote Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders is not only in the realm of digital skills, but overall. So a solution to the issue of a lack of digital skills will need to be a holistic one, a larger endeavour than just focusing on digital skills. Part 5. What the ADF can do to help. The ADF has the will and the means to contribute to the education of remote Indigenous communities, including in the realm of digital literacy. The ADF already provides a degree of support and engagement with remote Indigenous communities. For example, the Australian Army's Regional Force Surveillance Group, which operates in Australia's far north, employs over 1,300 soldiers, with many of them being of Indigenous descent. This unit provides opportunities for Indigenous people, offering them well remunerated work with, quote, flexible approaches to entry standards, end quote, and providing multiple avenues for upskilling, particularly to Indigenous recruits. This is to facilitate integration into the modern ADF workforce, which includes the ubiquitous use of digital technologies. The ADF is making an effort to include Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the workforce. This provides the Defence Force with unique capabilities and skills which only they can provide. In the process, Indigenous service members are provided with training and education, including in the operation of digital tools and equipment essential to their roles in the ADF. Part 6. Conclusion. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from remote communities do indeed face difficulty in accessing digital technology due to their remoteness, lack of infrastructure, and lower educational outcomes. However, as I explored, there is much Australian society can do to contribute to improving their circumstances and to close the digital gap, even in the face of these adversities. It is a necessary endeavour to embark upon, to realise an Australia which is more equitable, more inclusive, and beneficial to all.